My name is Jeremy Walton, and I know you've heard of shot on iPhone, but what does it really mean? Let's go! Look at this setup. Okay, it's not really a setup. I faked it, or did I? I'll get to that in a bit, but I really wanted to break down this whole shot on iPhone thing. It can get a little complicated, so I want to go way back. We're talking iPhone 5 and work our way up to what's happening now that might apply to what you might be shooting on. And I do want to cover some of my predictions for the future that involve Apple TV+. This should be a good video, or at least helpful if you're doing any kind of smartphone for video, which I know you are. The film I want to start with is the 2015 film Tangerine, directed by Sean Baker, cinematography by Radium Chum. There's a lot of films shot with an iPhone. Actually, a lot more than I thought when I was doing a little research, but this film was really the first one I remember with its premiere at the Sundance Film Festival. They shot this film with 3 iPhone 5s and used a Steadicam I've never heard of called the Smoothie. Think about that. In my pocket is an iPhone 13 Pro Max, and they had a Sundance film with an iPhone 5. All I can say is we've come a long way. They also used anamorphic lenses from Moondog Labs that weren't even out yet. It was just a Kickstarter campaign at the time, and they used something called Filmic Pro. Yeah, you know the app. It's something I use and have been using for a while when I shoot with my iPhone. In post, they added some saturation with some grain, and there you go. Oh, and they did have professional sound on set. Keep that in mind. I wanted to point all these things out to show the beginnings of what we know and use today. The second film that I remember hearing about was the 2018 film Unsane, directed by Steven Soderbergh and cinematography by Peter Andrews, aka Soderbergh. I've talked about Soderbergh on this channel, so watch my other videos or go look him up to see his resume. For this film, we're now on the iPhone 7 Plus, and he was using the popular Moment lenses. That's a company you should know by now, but head over to their website to see an array of products if you want to get started with your iPhone. The lenses used were the 18mm, a 60mm, and a fisheye. He also used the built-in lenses on the iPhone, as we can see in some of the behind-the-scenes footage. While looking this film up on IMDb, I noticed the GH5 was listed as well, just in case you were curious. Like Tangerine, Unsane used the Filmic Pro app as well. When Soderbergh was asked about exclusively shooting all his movies on the iPhone, he said, "I'd have to have a pretty good reason not to be thinking about that first. There's a philosophical obstacle a lot of people have about the size of the capture device. I don't have that problem. I look at this as potentially one of the most liberating experiences that I've ever had as a filmmaker, and that I continue having." Now, he stuck with that for a bit, but has recently been using the red Komodo. That brings up an interesting conversation about size. What if there was an iPhone that was slightly bigger, being able to utilize better lenses? Or what if Red could make a slightly smaller cinema camera that still uses their Redco RAW format? You can see we're getting pretty close to that, and maybe that's why Soderbergh went to a Komodo over an iPhone. Something to think about. The Shot on iPhone campaign started around 2014. Do you remember the billboards? That's my first memory, and it was impressive, not going to lie, and a lot of the Shot on iPhone ads continued to roll out. I can't go through them all, but one in particular really stood out. That was the Snow Brawl commercial for the iPhone 11 Pro. That was the first time I was like, wow, that was shot in an iPhone. Before you form an opinion, there's a lot more to that production which I want to cover, so stay with me. The Snow Brawl was filmed by David Leitch. He also directed Hobbs & Shaw, Deadpool 2, so there's that. What I find interesting with this setup and looking at the BTS footage is I don't see any additional lenses being used. That's something I figured was going to happen. The lenses get better, we start having more options, and I think in most cases, to keep things simple, which is the point of using an iPhone, it just makes sense to use the existing lenses. Now, it might be they didn't want to cover up the lenses for the behind the scenes footage, but you never know. I could say the same thing for not seeing any ND filters, although based on the action scenes, they could be cranking the shutter to achieve a certain look. Same thing goes for showing the native app instead of the Filmic Pro app, which usually gets used. Some of this could be marketing, but you know Apple will keep making improvements to the point you can do everything with the phone itself. The other thing to take notice of, and is really a factor in this whole shot on iPhone thing, is look at the crew, the lights, the budget they probably had. That's why the shot on iPhone doesn't always ring true to me. I think I can make my point in the latest shot on iPhone marketing campaign. This was directed by two-time Oscar winner Kathryn Bigelow and cinematography by now Oscar winner Greg Fraser for his work on Dune. If you haven't watched my videos on the movie Dune, go have a look. There's a lot of good and interesting material about the project you can dive into. Alright, back to iPhone stuff. You can say shot an iPhone, but when it's Academy Award winning filmmakers that have been in the game for a while, you can say shot an iPhone with an asterisk saying results may vary. Even if we excluded the filmmakers, have a look at the production value. Look at these sets. This isn't filming with your friends in your backyard. The production value and budget can really help something look amazing when your campaign for the iPhone is showing your customers how good something can look. Now, let me say this. I love my iPhone, I have a bunch of Apple products, I use them on the daily. What they can do is amazing and I wouldn't be able to do what I do without their products. I did a video about the Canon R3 versus iPhone 13 Pro Max, and I challenge you to watch that and do your best to pick out what shots are on the iPhone and what was shot on the R3. Now, a lot more went into that than just pointing my iPhone at something. I explained what I did in the video, but just like the shot on iPhone campaign, a lot more went into the production than a point and shoot setup. Now, if I owned Apple, I'd probably do the same kind of marketing. I just think it's important to understand the differences and to at least talk about it. That brings me to one other piece of marketing, cinematic mode. I understand why they use that term, but is this an Apple thing or are they using language that's used way too often by filmmakers to express an idea that really doesn't have any meaning? A brief recap, I have a bunch of videos all discussing what is cinematic filmmaking, and I really break it all down to give some clarification. In terms of depth of field for the iPhone, yeah, it's something it couldn't do before and I'm sure it'll just get better and better over time. I just want to point out a couple films I've mentioned before, and one is the Revenant, which uses deep focus to tell their story so we can actually see what's happening. And we can even look at the film The Favorite that also used deep focus with wide angle lenses to capture the beauty of its environment. So, are we not calling these films cinematic because they don't use a shallow depth of field? I don't think Apple is trying to say that, but us filmmakers need to remember that. Everything that you consider cinematic, I'm sure you can find an example of the complete opposite. All I'm saying is do your research and don't get stuck on marketing or terms that don't really have a specific definition. Now, what about the future of the Shot on iPhone campaign? I have a thought. When do you think a series on Apple TV Plus will be entirely shot on iPhone? I mean, what a great advertisement for their phones when their TV shows are shot on those phones. It might sound crazy, but they have Academy Award winning filmmakers shooting commercials for their phones. And what did they call it? Hollywood in your pocket. I think it'll happen, and I can totally see Apple marketing specific phone setups to actually function like a cinema camera. How far will they go? Not sure, but it makes sense for their platform. Here's a few pics of what Frame.io is working on. They are really going big on the camera to cloud setup and incorporating an iPhone and Filmic Pro workflow. If you're editing in Premiere, then Frame.io might sound familiar. That's for another video though, but look it up and get familiar. Now, those setups become large when you attach cinema glass, or you could go with something like a red Komodo. I don't know, because where do you draw that line? And what will things be like in a year? In 2 years? I think shot on iPhone is going to be sticking around and changing things, hopefully for the better. Well, there you have it. Shot on iPhone. What does it really mean? Hope you enjoyed the video. Hit that like button because there's definitely more on the way. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Leave a comment if you want to. Until next time, it's a wrap.